I will be, yeah, Diana?
Pat,
Yes.
we haven't started.
Good morning, I'm Pat Farr. I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Lane County Commissioners. I'm standing in for Joe Burney this morning, who's the chair, and he'll join us later in the meeting. I will call this meeting of the Lane County Commissioners to order. Good morning, everyone. First item on the agenda today is adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Mokrahajski, do you see any adjustments to the agenda?
No, we don't have any from staff.
Thank you. Any from the board or others present? Thank you. Emergency business. Mr. Mokrahajski, any emergency business?
No, we have no emergency business today.
I see none. Then we'll move along to item 3 on the agenda today, which is public comments. If you'd signed up for public comment today, or if you're joining us and would wish to sign up, you can do so at this point in time. The speakers will be taken in order. You'll be allowed 3 minutes, at which time there'll be a signal indicating that your time has stopped. Please conclude the sentence you're on at the sound of the signal if you get to that point. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment this morning?
We do not, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Then we'll move along to Commissioners' response to public comments and or other issues or remonstrances. Commissioners. Chair Buck, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that we had a very good meeting upriver last night with McKinsey folks regarding rebuilding. Myself and a lot of our land management staff went. They had really good questions, really strongly requesting permit fees go down, and I let them know of our update that we were going to do a work session on that. But it was really good just to be able for them to see our land management staff in person, because we're going to have to establish those relationships over time as people come in and do their permits. And with COVID, it's been so hard on the phone and just doing it by email. And now they see the human beings behind the work. And it's really important for us that we continue doing meetings like that on some regular basis. So we're trying to work out how we might be able to come up or do them down here for the people that are actually still left in the metro area and not able to be upriver yet on a regular basis. So stay tuned. I'll announce those when that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Further comments or remonstrances? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good morning, everyone. On a similar vein, I just wanted to mention, and my South Eugene district is almost entirely within the city of Eugene, and I have 10 neighborhood associations in my district, 9 of which are quite active. And I've made a commitment to try to attend each one in the first few months, at least, to say hello and introduce myself. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the associations that I've been able to, attend their meetings so far, and the incredible work that they're doing on the ground in partnership and to help advance a lot of our work and the mission of this organization, particularly around providing temporary shelter to our unhoused and unsheltered neighbors. And also with COVID response, in particular, the Whitaker Community Council organized some really incredible vaccination clinic events last weekend. And they're just incredibly activated, involved folks, and we really rely on our partners on the ground and folks in communities doing the heavy lifting right along with us. So I just really want to appreciate the Jefferson Westside neighbors, the Friendly Area neighbors, Whitaker Community Council in particular. Those are the meetings I've been able to attend, listen in on, and learn more about what they're doing to improve communities where they live. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. Further comments or remonstrances? Commissioner Bozovich, did I see your hand raised? Negative. Thank you very much. Then I will just say a couple of things. Mr. Mokrahajski, I'm going to mention to you right now that Commissioner Burney, Chair Burney, will be joining this meeting after testifying at the Oregon State Senate this morning. That's an indeterminate time. When Commissioner Burney does join the meeting, I will turn the gavel over to him at that point in time. If it's a short item we're on, I will finish that item. If it's a longer item, I will turn the gavel over mid-item. just wanted to let you know that that was happening. And I wanted to mention that yesterday we had a very vigorous Human Services Commission meeting. It's a panel discussion from a number of our nonprofit providers throughout the county, including from smaller cities, from Cottage Grove and locally. And we're asking a number of questions regarding rent relief, COVID response, and other specific items about how their work is going. And to a person, each of the people talking had 5 issues that I noted that really were issues which seems to be all of our nonprofits. The first is navigation by the people who need service. Many people right now have never needed service before, never asked for service, and they need particular help in identifying how to receive the service. Some people are reluctant to do so. Some people simply don't have the experience to do it. So the more outreach that we can do on that, the better they will be able to navigate the system. And Ms. Mokrajski, I'll say that we have a relatively easy system to navigate. If people go to our website, it really is quite easy to navigate through COVID and rent and other issues right from our website. Staff has done a great job of preparing the website and making it easy to access. The second is technology, that some of the people who need service, sometimes it's seniors, but not always, have difficulty with accessing technology, either through a lack of skill and experience or through a lack of bandwidth. That was universal. Staffing is an issue, as always, with both recruiting and retaining staff for our nonprofits. And the rising rent. Rents are rising at a pretty alarming rate right now, far greater than the income is rising for people on fixed incomes. And significantly in some of our outlying communities, Florence in particular, we heard from Bob Teeter, who said that what have been rentals are now selling at an accelerated rate. People are buying what were rentals and taking them out of the rental market. That's becoming an issue. So our already crunched housing situation is becoming more so by raising rents, or rents rising, excuse me, and by former rental properties no longer being available for rental. And then the final one is that this was mentioned by Councillor Fleck, who is also a Cottage Grove Sharing Director. He mentioned that rapid rehousing is not an option for people using the current stimulus packages or the current rent relief packages that are available through the federal government. So if people lose their housing, if they drop out of housing right now, rapid rehousing, the money cannot be used for that. So we have to turn every resource that we have into keeping people in the housing that they're in. Staff knows this, and it is something that we're working on across the board. So I just wanted to point that out, Ms. Mokrajski. It was a very robust session of our nonprofits, and that group of the panel is going to stay intact as a communication group to keep us informed of the things that really are affecting a broad swath of our nonprofits. The other thing I'd like to mention is that on Friday, I spent a good part of the day at Rockport up in 181st and Burnside in Portland. It's a very large multi-level housing, a set of projects out there, not projects, a set of agencies and facilities that are providing housing, and they're also providing beyond housing. It's not quite housing first, but they provide medical services, they provide nutrition and food services, and a number of other services. Really is a wonderful model. Thank you very much for listening to that. Anyone else with remonstrances or response? I see none. Then we'll move along, Mr. Mokrajski, to item 4 on the agenda. Excuse me, item 5, which is our COVID-19 response and recovery. We're scheduled for a 40-minute listening and work session on COVID response and recovery. Mr. Mokrajski, I'll turn the floor over to you to introduce your panel and to conduct this part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We have our COVID-19 response and recovery update. Mr. Adams is with us to provide some details. I'll just say briefly that we continue to make significant progress on our effort to vaccinate the community. As of last night, Mr. Adams may have some updated numbers, but we had about 118,000 total vaccines administered to over 76,000 individuals in our community. When I checked last night, we've been consistently exceeding the per capita vaccination rates in Washington, Marion, and Clackamas County. And we've been just creeping up towards Multnomah, but just behind Multnomah. But I checked last night, and we, as of last night, we had surpassed Multnomah in the per capita vaccination rate per 10,000 people. So Multnomah was around 2,070, and we were, I think, 20 or 30 above that per 10,000. So this is all a result, of course, and it's not, you know, it is a race. It is a race to vaccinate. We're not trying to beat anybody necessarily. We are trying to get shots in arms as quickly and effectively and efficiently as possible. I'm just really proud of the team of staff, Mr. Adams and all of our public health, our emergency response team, all of our staff and volunteers, an army of volunteers. We now have Rotary, folks from Rotary who are volunteering and helping with non-medical work at our clinics. And so just great work is happening there. And so we're seeing now, you know, last week around a 10,000 vaccines administered. This week we'll have over 12,000, and that number will continue to grow. Great coordination and partnership with healthcare providers in our community, from Peace Health, Oregon Medical Group, private entities like Bimart, and others. So a lot of great work continuing to happen there. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Adams to share more about where we're at and exciting plans for more mass vaccination clinics here this weekend.
Thank you, Steve, and Chair Farr, Commissioners, good morning. Delighted to be with you as always. Let's see. All right, hopefully you are seeing my slides, the familiar epicurve. Excellent, okay, wonderful. So the familiar epicurve, as you see, is really beginning to flatten out as we continue to click weekly on this graphic. So these data were as of yesterday, so 10,492 total cases. So we've added 10 more this morning in the last 24 hours. So the current numbers as of this morning are 10,502. We saw a decline in the individuals we're tracking as infectious in the community of 3, bringing us to 53, and those are truly summertime numbers from last year. 11 hospitalized at the moment, 3 in ICU beds, and we had 2 more reported deaths, bringing us to 136 as we go. So that epicurve, as you see, flattening as we get into March, really is can be viewed from the other perspective of how we are stacking up with respect to the county and school risk metrics that the Oregon Health Authority has put forward. So you see these are the latest data from state government. So this is not a movement week, we're in a warning week, but you can see that we've continued to trend down. We're now at 58. We're now at, my screen just jumped off. We're at 58.9 per 100,000 cases, and we continue to trend downward. So the next threshold is the lower risk category, and that is less than 50 cases per 100,000. We won't be making the leap in the coming week, but if we see the trend continuing in this direction, we can begin to prepare for yet another step down in our risk level. So really just in terms of thinking about vaccinations, and as Steve indicated in his opening remarks, we're continuing to scale up. And I thought it would be helpful to kind of just look at our progress. Today is the 16th of March. We're 2 weeks into the month, and 2 weeks ago, you see that we had delivered vaccinations here. So sorry, just moving this widget. So we had 56,000 people that had received a vaccination, 33,000 had one dose, another 22,000 had both doses. So that's where we were 2 weeks ago. 1 week ago, the last time I presented to you, we had moved up to 66,000 people who had received doses, at least 31,000 having their first dose and 34,000 being fully complete. And here we are now. These data are current as of yesterday from the Oregon Health Authority. We had some outages in the statewide database that tracks vaccinations. It was down for quite a bit yesterday, so we saw some new data entry happening. But here we are now at 79,000 people in Wayne County, 34,000 having gotten one dose, 44,000 receiving both doses, and that's a total of 122,000, almost 123,000 doses being administered. So that progress is translating, of course, into our specific focus for the month of March, which is making progress toward our Group 5 waves 1 through 4, our 65 plus population. So you see continued progress there. We're 2/3 of the way now through our 80 plus. We're at 60% for our 75 to 79, and on down 55% in our 70 to 74, and 43% now in our 65 to 69. So we're now more than halfway through, with 2 more weeks yet to continue to focus almost entirely on this group before we move into the next eligibility category. So, and then just bringing your attention back to the standing guidance from OHA about our eligibility criteria. So, obviously, last Thursday evening, President Biden indicated that it was his ambition to direct states to move to all individual eligibility by the 1st of May. And Friday morning, Governor Brown had a press conference. She applauded the president's ambition, but indicated that Oregon was not at this time making any specific adjustments to our vaccine phasing until such time as we begin to truly see those doses showing up within the ordering pipeline. Yesterday, a team of us met with the Oregon Health Authority to sit down and do some advanced planning for what they are anticipating is something of a surge in availability of vaccine. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, of course, as you know, signed a production deal with Merck. And so they're bringing the full capacity of Merck to bear on on delivering that particular vaccine. It's a 1-dose regimen, as you know, and we are expecting to begin to see substantial quantities of that particular vaccine available to us within the next 2 to 3 weeks is what they are thinking. So they put forward a planning scenario, and now that we're dealing with Johnson & Johnson as a single-dose regimen, they're really keen to understand specifically our capacity to deliver shots. So if you add your boost and your prime together, Wayne County is getting about 17,000 doses in the current week, and so they're asking us for what it would look like to scale up north of 30,000 a week in terms of our ability to be able to do that. So we were able to share our specific strategy in terms of continuing to maximize the efficiency of our mass vaccination facilities and bring new facilities online. So we know that we've got the fairgrounds, the Lane Event Center is now able to do 3,000 doses a day. So operating on a Saturday, Sunday, we're able to accomplish 6,000 doses at that facility. The second facility that we brought online in the latter half of February at Lane Community College, we can get 1,800 doses a day, perhaps 2,000 with some additional tweaks. So with those 2 existing facilities, we can do 10,000 a week just on Saturday and Sunday operations. As you know, we're bringing a 3rd facility online this weekend at Autzen Stadium. It is a little bit bigger in terms of its the number of lanes than the Lane Event Center. We know we can get 3,000 out of that. We think we can maybe get as many as 4,000 a day out of that facility once we work out the kinks. So we're opening this weekend with a lower number just because we know we're going to break it and fix it and reconfigure, which is a really fun opportunity. So that's one prong of our strategy. And a second major prong is really thinking about our mobile mission capabilities and being able to go out and stand up clinics in various places. So we've demonstrated that at scale in the Florence area. With 2 clinics that we did there, 1,100 a day. This weekend, we're scoping a mission up the McKenzie Valley for 2 events in Mid-Valley and in the Upper Valley as well, and are planning to do somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 doses in a single day up the McKenzie to be able to bring vaccine to those eligible individuals. And then part of that strategy, of course, is very focused missions for some of our BIPOC communities, other vulnerable populations. Last week, we did an event with a Latinx Alliance at Willamette High School, and working with our partner, convened 60 individuals, and were able to provide vaccinations to them with a CBO-led event. The third prong of the strategy is, of course, distributing more broadly, getting doses delivered directly to some of our larger medical practices. Peace Health is taking direct delivery of 2,300 doses every week for distribution through the Riverbend Annex. And we've hardwired deliveries into Cottage Grove, into Peace Harbor in Florence, so that they're providing those vaccines. We're scaling up the distribution to Bimarts, to the Fred Meyers, to the rest of the primary care clinics that are enrolled. And that is indeed the strategy for how we get to 3,000 doses a week as we go. It's actually, it didn't turn out to be quite the stretch that we were anticipating in terms of getting some early kind of intelligence from OHA about production strategies. I think we've done a pretty decent job of continuing to bring new capacity online as new doses have become available. We've endeavored to ensure that we're always 2 or 3 steps ahead of that process, and not really wanting to be in a position where we're caught flat-footed with too many doses and not enough capacity to be able to get them out into the community. So as we go forward this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, we will be operating 3 mass vaccination facilities at once, Lane Event Center, LCC, and Otson, running a mobile mission up the McKenzie to take care of that, and then supporting smaller missions as well to other partners around town, including a Homes for Good event, as well as a smaller clinic that we're doing on Friday in partnership with Senior and Disability Services over at Willamette in the Springfield area. So Chair Farr, that is my update for the board this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. And I think we'll probably have some questions from the board. I have a quick one, and that is, this will be very, very quick. Lane County is distributing to Peace Health and other larger medical facilities and some pharmacies. Is there a continued distribution directly to pharmacies outside of Lane County from the federal government?
There are. Thank you, Chair Farr. So we have a couple of channels from direct allocations from the federal government. So one is the federal retail pharmacy program. And through that program, we are seeing, initially we were seeing for 18 facilities or stores in Lane County receiving 100 doses. That's increased now to 200 doses a week directly from the feds. And then we, of course, through the federally qualified healthcare centers and through our own community health centers, they are likewise enrolled in an FQ program that is standing up by the federal government, and they're receiving doses directly there. So we see that is coming in at about 500 doses a week and ramping up. So our CHCs are already delivering doses even as we speak, and we anticipate those channels to grow as well.
Thank you, Steve. I will have more questions from the board. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just a quick follow-up. I was going to ask similarly about the distribution channels, distribution partners versus direct channels that are, I don't want to use the word circumventing. It connotes something that I don't intend to say, but they're outside of Lane County Public Health distribution channels. But can you please, just sort of for the record, and anyone watching, affirm that any doses that are being delivered within Lane County, whether through Lane County Public Health channels or retail pharmacy, are still following the same eligibility criteria as outlined by the Oregon Health Authority?
They are. The only exceptions being those federal channels. So anything that is being allocated through the state of Oregon to us and then from us to partners, those are following all of the eligibility criteria that OHA put in place. We had an issue with the federal retail pharmacy program. The administration directed any of the participants to direct those doses to educators. And so Oregon being one of the few states that had already prioritized educators, and we've completed educators substantially here, we had issues with some of those federal pharmacies that are being supplied by the federal government reaching out to try to go into other ineligible educator populations. So that was brought to my attention, and we communicated with OHA specifically that that was occurring here in Lane County, one of the big college towns. That was elevated. A couple of days went by, and I checked back in with OHA. I understood that the governor took it up with the White House, and I also understood that OHA was working with CDC. That waiver, there was a waiver granted for those states that had already vaccinated educators, and the direction was to put those doses into our 65 plus population.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And my only other comment is just a thank you in the broadest sense to you, to your team, and to all of our community partners and the volunteers getting this done. It's phenomenal work.
Thank you, Commissioner Trigger. Further questions? Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Steve, just a quick question of clarification. In this slide about progress on our seniors, where it has percent vaccinated, is that percent first dose or is that percent both doses?
So thank you. So Chair Farr and Commissioner Bozievich, that is a combination. So that is not a percentage completed. It is a percentage of the total number of our seniors that either have one dose or both doses. Some number of them have both doses, particularly our 80 plus. So we've been running boost clinics for them in our 75 plus. But it is a mixed percentage.
Right, and we do know that just even with a single dose, there is a certain level of effectiveness that folks get as far as protection. I just want to make sure I understood that, so if I describe that to somebody out in the public, I'm describing it correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. Further questions? That seems to have exhausted the board's questions today. I have a couple of quick ones, and I think Commissioner Trigger's question really covered mine regarding the number of doses that are actually being administered in Lane County. The federal program does not necessarily follow the state's protocol, I understood you to say. But in the number of vaccinations that we're reporting, does it include the federal direct program in those numbers, the 77,137 that we have?
They do, Chair Farr. Very specifically, those data are being entered into alert, into the statewide database. So we received access to the state database information just within the last couple of weeks. So we've been able to go back and see exactly what, you'll recall there was a federal program for the long-term care facilities, for instance, some months ago when we first got embarked on this. So we're able now to see that those doses have indeed been entered. So those numbers do include the federal channels.
Perfect. My second question is regarding the unhoused population. Can you briefly describe how we're addressing the unhoused population?
We are, and so the unhoused, Chair Farr, is specifically one of the focus areas within our larger vulnerable populations strategy. So we have two primary partners to whom we can directly transfer doses, Willamette Family and to Whitebird. So Whitebird, as you know, has set up operations at Well Hall. in downtown Eugene. They're also just recently added to the federal qualified healthcare list as well, and so they will have access to federal doses beginning to come to them as well. So through Whitebird programs and through Willamette Family, those are really the kind of anchor points for us to be able to transfer doses, and then working in concert with many of the other advocacy organizations. They then have relationships into many of our segments of our unhoused population, and then can arrange for opportunities to provide vaccine, particularly to those individuals who are not currently within a shelter setting. In 2 weeks' time, on March 29th, the shelter settings become eligible for vaccination, no matter the age, because now we're only able to provide vaccine to those 65 plus amongst the unhoused. In 2 weeks' time, we move into that opportunity. So there's a huge opportunity to get to places like the Mission and other places, provide vaccinations, and enable them to begin to build back their residency. As you know, they're operating under much lower capacity than has been the case because of social distancing issues.
And thank you for that response. I would suspect that the numbers by Whitebird and by Willamette Family are being kept separately. So if anybody wanted to see those numbers, they'd be available on call.
They would.
And secondly, you say eligible for anybody, once we do begin vaccinations at shelters, eligible for anybody, but we remain 16 and older, is that correct?
So once the next eligibility criterion group includes all individuals experiencing houselessness, sheltered or unsheltered, regardless of age or regardless of pre-existing conditions.
Thank you. That's my questions. I just want a very quick comment, Mr. Adams. I was able to witness your operation at the Lane Event Center 2 weekends ago. Very smooth. The professional staff and the groups of people administering the vaccinations were, as everybody has stated, exceptional. Significantly, I followed the progress of a 72-year-old constituent who called me 3 weeks ago wondering why he hadn't received his vaccination. I used your words and those of Ms. Gaffney's to let him know that we're drawing from a pool and not line, that there is no line jumping happening. That kept him patient. It's not a word I like to use because patience is a really relative thing. And on Saturday morning, he called me as he waited in line that was moving very, very quickly at the Lane Event Center to receive his vaccination. So that's a testimonial to the fact that things don't happen as quickly as people sometimes hope, expect, and wish, but we are in progress and the line is moving. The pool is moving. I keep referring to it as a line. I think of the line at Jerry's, the single line to shop at Jerry's. The line never stops moving. It's a long line, but you never stop moving. And that's what I equate this to. So good job, Steve, by you and the staff. Any further questions for Mr. Mokrahysky or Mr. Adams? Excellent. Then thank you very much. Excellent report. And Steve, thank you for the daily reports and the one we received last night. Then we'll move along to our consent calendar. We have before us the consent calendar for March 16th. I'll entertain a motion on the consent calendar. Anyone watching online or subsequent to this meeting watching, if you click on today's agenda and view materials, you'll get the entire documentation of the agenda item that is being passed today on the consent calendar. So we have our consent calendar before us. Any items that needed separate discussion would have been pulled from this consent calendar, and these items will be moved, seconded, and passed without discussion. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Bozievich. No discussion to the motion. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Burney excused, absent. Thank you very much. Then we'll move along to item 7 on the agenda, which is County Council. First, Mr. Dingle, I see you are with us. Hello.
Good morning, Vice Chair Farr and members of the board. I don't have it.
Before we go, how about them Beavers, huh?
Yes, indeed. First time since 2016.
So to business announcements, Mr. Dingle.
I don't have any specific announcements, but I do have a follow-up on a matter that the board took up last week regarding the City of Eugene payroll tax. You should have all received an email from me on that. I don't really have much more to add to it. There was a question raised by Commissioner Buck about the authority of the board to act within the city. Then I made it clear we're not talking about the Board of Health, but just generally speaking. I think that I think it's likely that the board does have that authority. I don't see it as a direct conflict. And if the ordinance were to be drafted in a manner of as a fee, I've already talked to Mr. Tintle about this, that it would essentially be a percentage of, which is similar to what was attempted by Washington County. Essentially, it's a percentage of the amount of tax that's collected would be imposed as a fee, and that's not a tax. And it is not directly inconsistent with the payroll tax. In other words, it doesn't cancel it out or seek to nullify it. That's all I have, unless the board has a specific question. I believe that at this point it would be whether or not the board is desirous of directing staff to move forward with this, which would be drafting, would be the next step if the board wants to do something, would be to direct staff to draft an ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Questions under item 8A, announcements for Mr. Dingle. Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I have a question. It didn't occur to me until after our conversation on this topic before, but how would this be different? We currently, the vast majority of property taxes that Lane County collects actually go back out to other districts. So how do we charge these other districts for administering that function, and how would this be different?
Yes, that's actually, Washington County attempted that in the late 70s or early 80s and went to the Oregon Supreme Court or Court of Appeals. And the court said that they couldn't do that because there is a state statute that controls the collection of ad valorem property taxes. And that was the indication by the legislature that they intended the system to be uniform throughout all 36 counties in the state. There's no similar legislation regarding this type of tax.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Commissioner Trigger.
I thought we were talking about this as a fee, not a tax. I'm still just trying to wrap my head around how this is uniquely different from what we do with other districts, in that there's administrative cost to collecting and sometimes also dispersing.
Okay, so let me be clear. Like I said, in the early or late 70s, early 80s, Washington County drafted an ordinance that did exactly what you were talking about, Commissioner Trigger. It basically, they came up with a formula and said, we're going to charge the cities, the special districts, anyone who receives property taxes, we're gonna assess them a fee for processing the property tax receipts. A number of the cities and the districts filed a lawsuit against Washington County, and it went up to the Court of Appeals. And what the Court of Appeals said was, Washington County, you can't do that because there is a statute on the books that relates to ad valorem property taxes. And it makes it clear that it's supposed to be uniform throughout the state, and therefore you don't have the authority to do it. And what I meant to say here is there is no statute like that ad valorem property tax statute that says it has to be uniform throughout the state.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle.
So if I'm understanding you, the central difference here is this is not property tax dollars, and
Correct.
therefore use that precedent.
Correct.
Thank you. Further questions on item 8A? Mr. Dingle, I see no more further questions on 8A. Then we'll move along to 8B, which is we always look forward to this. Excuse me. It's our fatal crash investigation team. And today you have with you, it's listed as Sergeant DJ Mann, but last time I checked, Sergeant Mann is actually a lieutenant. Is that still the case? So, Mr. Dingle, I'll turn the floor over to you.
And
Oh, there you are, DJ. Hi.
Good morning.
Ms.
Yes, I'm a
Taylor,
lieutenant now.
I believe Ms. Taylor's going to put the slideshow up now.
Mr. Dingle, you have the floor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair. So can everyone see the slides? All right, very good. As you know, and this is, I think everyone now, including Commissioner Trigger, has seen a quarterly update. The fatal crash investigation team was formed in 2017. shortly after the board adopted the Transportation Safety Action Plan. I oversee the team, and that's done so that some of the work that is performed is protected by attorney-client privilege. We do have members from staff across all county departments, including the Sheriff's Office, Public Works, and Public Health. We review fatal crashes and brainstorm ways to keep that type of crash from happening from happening in the future. We meet once a month and we report quarterly to the board. The team does appreciate the opportunity to engage with you on this major public health priority. Included in your agenda packet is a traffic safety report and a transportation equity report for 2020, as well as a brand new initiative known as the London Road Safety Corridor. We're going to be highlighting some of those key elements in our presentation today. The big one is we did, and you'll see more about this. It was very exciting. I think it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we made our presentation to the committee and they approved the creation of the London Road Safety Corridor. Next slide. Okay, and this is this is an overview and an update about our safety structure. We've learned from our safety planning work that our greatest safety risks are driver mistakes or poor choices, such as driving distracted, intoxicated, or speeding. That means if we have the right interventions, we can prevent many of these crashes. You've heard us refer to the safety ease of enforcement, engineering, and education. This aligns with our county department, whose departments are represented on the team, the Sheriff's Office for enforcement, Public Works for engineering, and Public Health, especially their prevention specialists on education. This year we've added equity to be considered in all of our work. This is going to be integrating the emergency response with the London Road Safety Corridor, which we'll discuss later today. Both equity and emergency response are identified in our Transportation Safety Action Plan as system support actions. Our Transportation Safety Action Plan details engineering, education, and enforcement recommendations to reduce fatal and severe injury crashes. The work we do is data-driven and best practices and helps us focus our limited resources in a way that actually makes a difference in reducing fatal and severe injury crashes. Lane County also joined the National Strategy on Highway Safety, committing towards working toward zero deaths. Not only are we working towards zero deaths on our roadways, we're building ways to protect our most vulnerable roadways, such as for other uses, such as people walking and biking, and the transportation disadvantaged, such as the very young, old, and disabled who rely on other forms of transportation. And we're paying attention to their safety as well. Next slide. So we have been keeping track of how Lane County compares to other counties in Oregon with regard to traffic fatalities. This chart shows the top 4 counties in Oregon that have had the most fatalities in recent years: Multnomah, Lane, Marion, and Clackamas. Clackamas was the first county in Oregon to create a safety action plan. They have a robust safety plan, including safety education coordinator. As you can see, Clackamas County has been successful in reducing their fatalities. Lane County is the second county to adopt a safety action plan. From that work with ODOT, it has provided a short-term grant funding for several safety education initiatives, including a regional safety education coordinator housed at ELCOG, a rural-focused safe route to school coordinator, also housed at ELCOG, and a rural-focused driver education coordinator housed at the Lane Education Service District. We began our safety action planning work in 2015 when we learned that in 2014-15, Lane County had more traffic fatalities than any other county in Oregon. In recent years, there has been a downward trend in traffic fatalities in Lane County. However, 2020 was a difficult year to measure because of the COVID pandemic, resulting in an overall reduction in traffic volumes by about 15%. I would also note that Clackamas County came and attended a presentation by us about how to start their own FSIT. Next slide. Pandemic lockdowns and stay-at-home orders have kept many drivers off the roads in the last year, but those who did venture out found open lanes that only invited reckless driving, leading to a sharp increase in traffic crash deaths across the country. The National Safety Council estimates 42,000 people died in vehicle crashes in 2020, an 8% increase over 2019, and was the first jump in 4 years. Plus, the fatality rate per 100 million miles driven spiked 24%, the largest annual percentage increase since the council began collecting data in 1923. Of the reckless behaviors, early data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration shows speed to be the top factor. Also, tests of trauma center patients involved in crashes show increased use of alcohol, marijuana, and opioids. And even though traffic is getting close to pre-pandemic levels, the bad behavior on the roads is continuing. Next slide. And locally, in Lane County, the greatest number of fatal crashes in 2020 occurred in April during the peak of the lockdown period. Next slide. Okay, here we go. We're paying attention to safety risks so that we can target our actions for the most effective results. In addition to tracking crash data trends, we're evaluating corridors that have had the most fatal and severe injury crashes. The top 12 county roads with the most fatal and severe injury collisions are listed here in this slide. Additionally, we are looking at census data to identify equity issues for the people living along these corridors. In your agenda packet, the last page of the 2020 Transportation Equity Report provides a map of these corridors and identifies populations of concern, such as people of color and disabled populations. After an intensive review of all the data, we were able to designate the first 7 miles of London Road as the safety corridor, which we'll share more information about next. We want the pilot project to demonstrate success so that we can expand upon it and include more of these corridors. Now I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Mann to share more about the safety corridor. Oh, I guess it is me. I guess it's me. Is it me or you, DJ, that's going to do this?
I think you're then, man.
I'm sorry about that. Steve, I was planning on you taking this.
Oh,
I'd jump in at the crash cost.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that. So the safety corridor have been in place. Safety corridors have been in place for many years, but only on state highways. In 2019, the Oregon legislature directed ODOT to create a pilot program to enable safety corridors on county roads. Last year, Marion County became the first county to designate one of their county roads as a safety corridor. Last month, Lane County became the second. Safety corridors are based on fatal and severe injury crash rates. The first 7 miles of London Road met the criteria, with 3 fatal crashes and 3 severe injury crashes between the reporting period of 2014 and 2018. The safety corridor designation means the traffic fines will be doubled. We'll be installing signs on London Road to show the safety corridor designation and about the fees doubling. Before we do that, we are creating and implementing a management plan to develop strategies for combining public education with engineering and enforcement activities on the corridor. And I just would add, the way that this works is there's a committee that you meet and make a presentation to, and they decide whether or not they'll approve the safety corridor. They not only approved our safety corridor, but actually encouraged and suggested that we, based on the statistics that we put up, that we consider approaching them about another one. But we're going to be careful about because of the resources that are involved. Now I will turn it over to the Lieutenant. Oh no, you're not going to do it till the crash? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think I'm slide 13.
Okay. An equity analysis informed our safety corridor selection. We did not want to impose or double fines in an area of poverty. We wanted to be mindful about increasing police presence in communities of color. We also wanted to figure out if we needed to translate information into other languages. What the data told us was the population of concern in the area surrounding London Road are elderly and disabled. Elderly and disabled people have mobility issues that are more challenging on roads with speeding issues like London Road. We also took speed measurements on London Road to confirm that 30% of the drivers are driving too fast. We believe signs about doubling fees will be a deterrent to speeding. We have also committed to officers working overtime to do traffic patrol on London Road. The overtime is eligible for reimbursement through safety grants we secure with ODOT. Next slide. Our application of the state committee to designate London Road as the safety corridor was made by the Fatal Crash Investigation Team and was supported by Commissioner Buck, the city manager of Cottage Grove, our district attorney, and the Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee. We also heard from community members that they wanted to see more enforcement on London Road, that they were concerned about speeding and traffic safety. The fatal crash investigation team hosted a safety meeting at Cottage Grove Community Center to talk with the community about traffic safety issues. Gave out donated bicycle helmets, reflective gears to kids. We showcased some of the engineering projects on the roads in the area. Several people said they wanted to see safety improvement on London Road. Last summer, Public Works installed centerline rumble strips. This summer, Public Works will be upgrading guardrails and curve warning signs. This safety corridor designation will allow us to combine education and enforcement activities. We will also be meeting quarterly with ODOT and South Lane Fire and Rescue about the London Road safety corridor to explore other ideas for improving safety. Okay, speeding is the leading contributing factor in fatal crashes involving in rural Lane County, but intoxication is also a growing problem. Most of the severe injury crashes involve intoxication. Most current data available from the state at this time is that from 2018, which shows a significant increase in drug and alcohol involved fatal and severe injury crashes in Lane County. Preliminary data on more recent years tells us that this continues to be a growing problem. We know on London Road, most of the fatal and severe injury crashes involve drugs and alcohol. This data also tells us that most of these crashes are happening in the summertime. We believe there may be a relationship to summertime recreation in the Cottage Grove Reservoir. So we're timing the implementation of the safety corridor for targeted enforcement and education activities to launch during the peak of the summertime holidays, such as the 4th of July. And we will continue to update the board and will involve Commissioner Buck on our implementation plans. Now, I believe you're going to take over with the crash tip.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, commissioners. This slide here shows the $640 million associated with the total cost of fatal traffic crashes in Oregon by the CDC in 2018. If we could hit the next slide, please. This slide shows the total cost of fatal crashes with a national average and a cost per capita for comparable states. You see Oregon costs are below the national average and comparable to other states with similar population and miles of roadway. Although we normalize the data by expressing costs by population, it's important to ask ourselves whether these costs are normal. Are these significant costs acceptable, especially knowing that most fatal crashes are preventable? FCIT is focused on prevention, investing in an ounce of prevention for a pound of cure. Okay, next slide, please. We know that enforcement is very effective at reducing the very behaviors that are causing most fatal crashes, excessive speed and intoxication. At our December presentation, we shared this slide of national data about traffic crashes resulting in fatalities and injuries more frequently than other crimes. The board asked if we had comparable local data at the state or county level. We don't, but we know from public health data that accidents are the leading cause of death in Lane County after cancer and heart disease. Like that slide there shows one murder every 36 minutes versus a fatal crash every 16 minutes. Violent crime, 26.2 seconds versus every 14 seconds of a crash. Next slide, please.
Yes, Ian.
Well, I got just a little bit more. Providing traffic enforcement in rural Lane County is significantly challenging because it's nearly 4,700 square miles of land and often only has 3 deputies on duty who are busy responding to nonstop calls for service. They do not have time to actively focus on traffic enforcement in rural areas. In order to provide police services most efficiently, they also need to stay in a central location in order to minimize response times for serious calls for service. If you live in an area like the traffic safety corridor of London Road, you probably only see a deputy when there's a call for service in the general area. The Sheriff's Office does receive some ODOT grant funding that pays for deputies to work overtime and focus on traffic enforcement. This is overtime deputies are taking at the end of their shifts, or maybe they come in on their weekend with the sole purpose of traffic enforcement related to these grants. Deputies working these grants will be deployed to the London Road corridor and other roadways identified by FSET as priorities for traffic enforcement. We are very excited that the Board of Commissioners added funding for the 2 West Lane and 2 McKinsey recovery positions, deputy positions. This recent addition put more deputies in rural Lane County where they are providing traffic enforcement in addition to increased rural police services. Thank you. I will now turn it back over to Steve.
Board, that's all we have unless you have specific questions. We will be periodically updating you on the progress with the London Road Safety Corridor, the erection of the signs and the enforcement and how it's going.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Thank you, Lieutenant Mann, for the presentation. One thing I'll note from your the words you said, Lieutenant Mann, you said we often only have 3 deputies on duty. It wasn't too many years ago. There were times of the day when we had 0 deputies on duty. I do recall that. So 3 is, while it's low, it is distinctly better than we were. I think it was about 6 years ago we began to address that. So discussion questions on the fatal accident crash investigation team. Commissioner Bozevich.
Well, you caught me by surprise because I hadn't raised my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, then Commissioner Buck, then Commissioner Bozevich. I thought I saw you raise your hand prior to Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Buck, first, please.
I just wanted to express my gratitude for all the work that has been put into applying for the extra service there on London Road. The people of South Lane have heard about it, are appreciative. They're very aware of all the crashes and fatalities that have occurred there. I know we need this on many of our other roads that we're seeing the same thing happen, but I'm very excited to see how this particular proposal with the additional services in the area plays out, and if it actually reduces the numbers so that it can be something that may be implemented on some of our other roads. As you mentioned, it sounds like they're interested in being able to apply for some other areas of the county, depending on what resources we have to put into play. But I think whatever resources we decide would be well worth it. So thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Did I see your hand now, Commissioner Bozevich?
Thank you. Yeah, now you have. Yeah, I just wasn't ready to unmute myself when you called on me, so it took a second there.
Sorry.
So I just wanted to say, it's been great work. We implemented this team. I think it was after 2015 when we had over 50 traffic deaths here in Lane County. Or 2014 was that peak year, and it shows that we've been doing well. With the graph that you showed that had the deaths over the last several years drop below that, and that there's other things going on that maybe weren't touched on outside of London Road. I will note that there's a presentation to the ACT on the NEPA process. That's the phase 2 of the Highway 126 improvements between Eugene and Veneta, one of the corridors that has definitely been a very high fatality, high serious injury corridor, but it's a state road. So, that process is being done through the state, but we are working towards that. And there have been lots of improvements thanks to some work that Alex Kyler's done and the help we've gotten from Representative Holvey to get some targeted funding in that area, where we've actually done some intersection improvements and some left turn lanes. And if you drive that corridor now, the trees are back away from the road. There's sight visibility at the corners that there wasn't before. There's lighting at some of the bus stops that wasn't there before. So, we're not just working in one place. We are even working with the state on the state highway system. In addition, I think your one slide noted that Territorial was a site of some fatalities and serious injury accidents. We've got a huge project going down in the Lorraine area down there to improve Territorial Highway, where there was that one particular fatality with a cyclist, Jane Higdon. That's been a long time coming, but we're finally getting to do the work on that. A very difficult area to work through geotechnically with the landslides and all that to improve those roadways. But there's so much going on towards trying to make our roads safer in Lane County as much as we can do. I only wish we had the resources to do more traffic enforcement. It's one of the 4 E's that we're just kind of not able to do as much with just because of the resource constraints. And hopefully we'll get to improve that in the future and be able to do a little bit more on the enforcement side. That's the one nice thing about the grants around the safety corridor. We will get to do some targeted enforcement there, and hopefully that'll help with the education and get people to be a little bit more safe on London Road, because that's definitely been one of our worst corridors. Besides Pengra, Territorial, and a couple others I could name quickly. But I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing, Steve, and the committee. I know it's not just the 2 of you. It's about 10 people that participate regularly in the committee, and then all the staff that backs them up. On down to the deputies that are out there doing enforcement work, to the folks in our engineering department, handling contracts on Territorial Highway. It's a effort the entire county's been involved in, trying to get our roads to be safer, and the effort is showing fruit in our lower fatality rate. 1 fatality is still too many, so we'll keep working.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I believe you were muted, but I could hear you through the wall, so I heard you call on me. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sergeant Mann and Councilor Dingell, for this great presentation. Really, really helpful. Really appreciate it. I just wanted to name three things that stood out for me. One, I'm so excited to see a Safe Routes to School program in the rural communities start. As some folks may know, I ran a small public health nonprofit here locally called LCHA, the Lane Coalition for Healthy Active Youth, from 2007 to 2012. And we were the organization that brought the first federal and then state dollars into our community to pilot a Safe Routes to School program, first within 4J at a couple of schools, and then expanded district-wide, eventually reaching into Bethel and Springfield. So it's really gratifying to me to see this program grow now out into our rural communities. One of the reasons that program is so important is not only all of the 5 E's, but because it's really about changing the culture around transportation for future generations. Because one of the biggest problems around traffic fatalities and injuries is how many people are using cars as their primary or sole mode of transportation. And so both to reach some of our safety goals as well as our climate goals, really changing the transportation habits and practices and creating systems and environments that support alternative modes of transportation for future generations is critically important. So Safe Routes to School is the flagship way we have to get us there. So yay for Safe Routes to School. The other pieces that this brought to mind, and I really appreciate that we are so under-resourced in enforcement, but the best way to need less enforcement is to work further upstream on the engineering changes that we need, the education changes that we need, and better resourcing our drug and alcohol treatment programs. By the time someone's behind the wheel impaired, it's already too late. And if they just got lucky and didn't get into an accident that time, it's only a matter of time before that happens. I'm guessing if we saw statistics around how many of the serious injury and fatal crashes involving drug and alcohol were not the first instance of that driver driving impaired, it would be pretty nearly all of them. So I think that just really speaks to us remembering the interconnectedness of our work, so that in other meetings, at other tables, when we're talking about funding drug and alcohol treatment, we're remembering how it links back to the commitments that we're making and the goals we're setting around traffic safety. And finally, and on a similar note around interconnection, I think this also really speaks to when we looked at the slide that you put up about the high percentage of elderly and disabled and alter-abled folks in the one safety corridor region. the need for robust, interconnected mass transit and other alternate modes in our communities. Again, getting more single drivers and single cars off the road is one of the best things we can do to hit on multiple goal areas around safety and public health here at the county. Thank you again for a tremendous presentation. Really, really helpful, really informative. Appreciated all the charts and graphs, making it really accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Trigger. And I do hear you through the wall also. Sometimes it seems like we're in the same room. We're so close. But I'd like to remind you, I know you remember this, the years that you and I worked together at Food for Lane County, our desks were actually closer then than they are today, which I heard your voice quite a bit then. One thing I'd like to say, Commissioner Bozevich, you talked about the Highway 126 a little bit, and in addition to some of the improvements you mentioned, one of the most notable is the shortening of the passing lane at Badger Mountain. Anyone who drives home from Florence knows that that windy passing lane was a horrible nightmare, like a NASCAR race. The shortening of the passing lanes helped that quite a bit, as well also has the addition of the passing lane at Walton. So great improvements that you mentioned. Representative Polvey had a lot to do with that. I believe that Senator Brzezinski also helped with some of those improvements on the state highway. Lieutenant Mann, thank you very much. Mr. Dingle, thank you very much. Anything further on this agenda item?
Nothing further on this, but I do remind the board we have an exec session later this morning.
We will have an executive session. Thank you very much, Mr. Dingle. And I will note that I'm continuing to handle the gavel in Commissioner Bernie's, Chair Bernie's excused absence as he presents testimony to the Oregon State Senate.
I think he's here.
Then I didn't see the message on that. Then at this point, I will happily relinquish the gavel to Chair Bernie. Welcome back, Chair. I hope your testimony was received well.
Well, in that none of you were there, I can say it was received tremendously. Thank you very much.
And then you didn't follow, we just concluded item 8B and we're moving on to item 9. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. So we're on item 9A, Commissioner Business Announcements.
We're on 8A.
Pardon me?
8A.
8A. Sorry.
We misled you. I'm sorry. It's 8A, not 9A.
I apologize. Thank you. I assure you this will be the only mistake I make this meeting. I apologize. 8A, Commissioner Business Announcements. I saw Commissioner Bozevich's hand up. Oh, was that just to correct me?
Yeah, we're on county administration announcements.
Okay, county admin announcements. Anyone?
Chair Bernie, I moved the gavel hand up. I apologize.
All right, I'm happy to share a few announcements, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, if you would like. I just have a couple of things here. First, the board last week had requested had made an assignment related to the LCC Aviation Academy program, and I wanted to provide an update for you. I did share an email, and I'll just do a brief overview of the email information that I sent. I'd asked Austin Ramirez, our Community and Economic Development Manager, to look into this. Let me just, before I even say that, I'm not sure if all the commissioners are aware of this, but Austin, our Community and Economic Development Manager, who we hired just a little over a year ago in that role, was named, was given an LCOG award, a regional award for economic enhancement. For the work that he's done in the past year around both COVID response, COVID emergency response, efforts on, particularly on small business support, as well as with the Holiday Farm Fire and jumping into that role, leading housing recovery, even though he doesn't have a background and it's not his role to be involved in housing. He just has done incredible work on both of those emergencies in the first year on the job. And he was recognized with that regional award. So he's a great talent in our organization. We're really pleased with the work that he's doing and continues to do. And so we tapped him for this, and he very quickly reached out, had conversations with LCC, the Eugene Airport, and Lane Workforce Partnership. And long story short, the program is no longer being cut. They are still working on challenges around fiscal sustainability. We are going to continue to monitor the program because we agree that it has some real benefits to our community, our workforce, and our economy. What we heard from LCC is that they're working on a program redesign, including a new degree that'll roll out this summer. They've had several capital investments on the horizon, including deferred maintenance issues on aircraft, new planes, and related elements. Federal and state resources restrict use of funds on capital expenses, so that's been a limitation, but I think there's also some opportunity with some funding coming forward that will allow them to make some of those investments. They have a $1 million fundraising goal for capital expenses and additional future costs, including simulators and facilities. And they've developed a 3 to 5 year plan for fiscal sustainability, at which point, if they don't reach their goal, the program could again be up for elimination. Our general understanding is that it's a really costly program to run, as you would imagine, because of the equipment and the infrastructure and the facilities required there. They're looking for ongoing annual community support. Airlines have provided some incentives to hiring, promoting pilots from programs, but otherwise have not contributed to the program directly at this time. I think there's some excitement with Southwest Airlines coming into town for some potential reinvigorating of that program. And the Academy has a goal to increase program marketing because there really is a lack of awareness of the program within the community. Again, we touched base with Eugene Airport and Lane Workforce Partnership, so there's definitely a growing community understanding of the value of this program and a commitment to seeing it continue. So we will continue to monitor that, but I just want to offer that as we get to your assignments, probably one if you agree that we would say we can probably remove from your assignments. The other thing I just wanted to note, sent out in our daily email update to folks yesterday, but there was an article, a really nice article in the Register Guard about just a very thoughtful, straightforward kind of data analytics article online last week, Sunday's print version, about diversity in the local workforce in the public sector, the large public sector organizations. And I want to highlight a couple things and just use this opportunity to talk about a couple of the programs that we've initiated that we're really excited about. And I'll sort of add the asterisk or the caveat. This is not a declaring victory or mission accomplished, but rather sort of a moment along the way in our commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and access work for us to sort of celebrate progress and also recommit to the work ahead of us. But there's just a recognition of what we have known in this organization, really committed to over the last several years of making intentional investments to improve the outreach and recruitment of a diverse workforce, the retention, the promotion of diversity within our workforce. And so several years ago, we hired Laura Vincent. We created a position, hired Laura Vincent, who is a new position focused on really engaging community partners in getting more diversity in our job applicants, that it kind of starts there. And we've seen since 2014 about a 50% increase in the diversity of job applicants for Lane County jobs. That in and of itself is not the outcome, right? The outcome is to have a more diverse workforce, but we also have now seen growth in the diversity of our overall workforce. And so they noted in this article that among the large public sector organizations, Lane County has the most diverse workforce despite having the least diverse overall population. 89% of county residents identify as white, while 80.9% of county staff identify as white. In every department, at least 10% of staff identify as a race other than white. The other thing I wanted to highlight that they highlighted here that to me is really important is the diversity within our supervisor, manager, and executive level ranks, because that's where decisions start getting really decisions about hiring people within the organization and decision making around programs and staffing and organizational decisions get made at those levels. And so if we don't have representation in those positions, then it has an exponential impact on the rest of our organization and community. And so it's something we really have committed to in the last several years. And they noted that supervisors in Lane County are the most diverse among the large public sector employees locally, with 14.8% identifying as non-white and each race and ethnicity represented. I also note that the percentage of women in leadership positions in our organization has steadily increased over the last several years, from below 40% to now above 50%. So we now have women making up more than 50% of the supervisor, manager, and executive level positions in our organization. So it's good progress. We're not done, and we have a lot of work to do. And of course, we're excited about our equity lens that the board has been briefed on. And that is, to me, really where the rubber meets the road around our equity work, because it means every decision maker in the organization, as we make decisions, we're embedding equity as part of the consideration, that before we make any decision, we're really considering who all is affected by this decision. Have we considered everybody in our organization and community that is going to be affected by this decision? Have we brought the people that are going to be affected by this decision into the decision process? The last thing I just want to note, two programs that are really close to my heart that I feel really strongly about, that we've created in the last few years. One is a diversity internship program. I've shared with many folks that I started my career as a paid intern. When I was a college student at Marquette University, I got a job and I would have done it for free, but they paid me, right? And so the door was opened for me as a young college student to get this paid internship working for a county executive, an elected county executive. And I did that through the course of the completion of my undergraduate degree. And then you know what happened? It turned into a full-time job. They offered me a full-time job because I had a foot in the door and I built relationships. They got to know me and they saw the value that I could offer, and I got a job. That kicked off my career. And so I've always reflected on that moment as it was the access point, right? That initial access point is really critical, and how difficult it is for people who have not had the type of access that people who look like me have had historically. And what can we do within our organization to try to create the access for people who don't look like me? So we created this diversity internship program focused on hiring interns and paying people to serve in internship roles across our organization who are women and people of color. We've hosted over 40 interns in those roles throughout every department in our organization, and we've hired 7 of them to full-time positions. So 7 of those 40 people have been hired into full-time positions in our organization, and several others have been hired into temporary positions. So they may not have been initially full-time positions, but temporary positions. And then the other program I just want to mention is the Emerging Leaders Program. That this is a program we've had 3 cohorts of emerging leaders. We have around 20 plus individuals who are currently employees of the organization that go through a 6 to 8 week program where they study various leadership criteria and trainings, and they work as a cohort. We've had 3 different cohorts go through that. We've had 63 graduates of that program. Of those 63 graduates over the past, I think it's been 3 years, 57 of those 63 people are still with us. So only 6 of the 63 that went through that program have left. 21 of those 63 people have had some sort of career movement or promotion since they've graduated from the Emerging Leader Program. So 37% have had some sort of career movement. 9 of the individuals have promoted into supervisor positions. So these are people that are not in supervisor roles, but they aspire to leadership roles, and they go through this training program. Again, 21 people of the 63 have been promoted. 9 have been promoted to supervisor positions. That's 16%, and 43% of career movement is into supervisor positions. So I just wanted to highlight those two. We're going to continue those. And again, these are things that we feel like really create access into the organization. There are a couple of things that create greater access into the organization, and then opportunities for promotion once you're in the organization. And then the great work that our HR team and our departments are doing to really reach out and encourage people to apply for jobs, and then a lot of work that we're doing within our hiring process to make sure that interview panels have representation on them, the people that are making decisions about hiring, that there's representation there, and then a number of things, of course, around our annual performance evaluations and that are reviewing those different metrics. So thank you for giving me a minute to just sort of highlight some of those things, and I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions on those topics or other issues you may have.
Well, no one's counting, but we gave you 11 minutes, Steve. Greg Rickoff, did you have announcements to make?
Chair Bernie and County Administrator Steve Malkowski, the county clerk and I were hoping to slip in an item here to follow up with the conversation you had last week on the voters pamphlet. And it looks like Cheryl Betchart has joined us for that. Just very quickly, with the conversation last week, the county commissioners articulated the value of advancing all voters' access to clear, timely, and equitably accessible electoral information. And we heard 2 separate asks last week. One was the longer range goal of working with the state legislature and perhaps state funding but for us to return to the board with a proposal that would create a voters pamphlet for elections where the state does not provide a pamphlet. That was one. That work is still ahead of us. But we also heard a request to return to the board with a proposal to provide additional information regarding contested races in the May election. And if that's accurate, the county clerk and her staff have put together a proposal to do just that, and she'd like to give you the overview now.
Please.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, commissioners. So we spent some time evaluating what we could put in place rather quickly to give an opportunity for those that have filed for contested races, some place to provide some information in their campaigning. What we have determined is that we can put together a form, a PDF form. We would email it out to the candidates that are in contested races. Currently, we have 17 contested races out of the 200 positions that are open for this election. We would send the form to those individuals by email. If they chose, it'd be completely optional. They could complete that. It would include a candidate statement as well as a place for endorsements, just a 1-page form that they would complete, have to sign, return back to us by a specified deadline. That would be April 2nd, which is just before the mailing of our out-of-country and military ballots. Then we would put that on our webpage, which is the same location as the candidate filing information that they currently submit to us and we place on our webpage. So it would have their candidate filing information. It would have this statement that they would fill out, which is a 1-page document. And it would also have a place where they could put their photo. So we would have them email it back to us. We would include it in our webpage. And that would be an opportunity for them to submit some information since we are not producing a voter's pamphlet. So that is what we feel is a good online solution for this election for contested races. So thank you for the opportunity to present that to you.
Well, thank you for doing all that work and being responsive to quite the discussion at our last board meeting. There have been 2 announcements. Are there any others? And then I'd like to open it up for commissioners to pick which item they may want to provide some input on. But thank you very much, Ms. Betcher. Are there any other items from administration? Seeing none, would any commissioners like to make a statement, ask a question? Is it related to either Mr. Mokrahysky's discussion of equity in Lane County or Ms. Betchart's discussion of trying to do what we can as it relates to this upcoming election? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Very briefly, Mr. Mokrahysky, I'm going to remind everyone that for a couple of weeks now, I've been telegraphing an agenda team request that I'll be presenting at today's agenda team request item on the agenda surrounding declaring racism as a public health crisis in Lane County. That will come at the agenda team request. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
I appreciate all the equity work that we've been doing, so thank you for that update. On the item regarding the voters pamphlet in this online alternative for this particular session, session's not the right word, but I very much appreciate the work that's done behind the scenes to find some kind of alternate, because I think the public deserves that at the very least. And because we don't have a long-term solution quite yet, but we know we're working on it, that I wholeheartedly support doing this online voters guide, I guess you could call it, for the contested races. So just know that you have my support in that. And if there's anything that we can do to help get that information out to the public, to know that it's available, knowing that it's a short turnover, given the I believe it was April 2nd timeline. Of course, I'm willing to share that, and hopefully the rest of the commissioners would be willing to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Administrator Mokrahysky, I just wanted to publicly thank you and acknowledge your leadership. The article you referenced in the Register Guard mentions these changes have occurred since 2014, which is the year you joined Lane County. So it takes leadership, it takes encouraging other leaders within the organization to make that work happen. And I appreciate you doing that and the role you play in the successes we've seen. Regarding the voter pamphlet / online contested candidate profiles option, I really appreciate that so much. I just want to make clear again for anyone from the community watching, we don't consider this a substitute. This is not a long-term solution. It's a wonderful, good faith stopgap measure and the best we can do given the timeline and resources at hand for this cycle. But I want to assure folks that I, for one, will not be advancing that this is the solution. It's very different. It's a passive form of voter education. People still have to proactively think to go on the county elections website and search it out. Very different than people receiving something tangible in hand along with their ballot, which is such an important part of our election system in Oregon. So wanted to really acknowledge and appreciate staff for coming up with a good faith temporary stopgap measure for this cycle and for everyone's work that we have ahead of us to address this issue for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to weigh in? Seeing none, I would like to echo what Commissioners Buck and Trieger stated about really such a good faith effort under difficult circumstances to provide voter information and to commit to a solution. If I may, I would like to, on the one hand, I read that article too. Well, that's not quite true. My wife read it to me, but I'm aware of that article. And, it made Lane County look good relative to others. Another way of saying that is we all have a lot more work to do. But I would just like to state, if I might, that there is a difference between equity, which relates to fairness and inclusion to the degree possible in an organization like ours, and full equality and full equality in employment opportunities, and full employment. So as we all strive to be as virtuous as we can and be an example, let's also recommend those statistics don't really apply out there to the entire employer community. And Steve, when you mentioned your personal experience, I just would like to state that 85% of first jobs or work experiences that young people in this country get, no matter how good or bad the school system, training agencies, is through knowing some caring adult, be that a teacher, a counselor, a parent, an uncle, a pastor, a friend, whomever, a coach, that cared enough about them to connect them to a work opportunity. Well over 80%, and your story exemplifies that. And when you look at where young people live that don't have those connections inherently in their life or in their neighborhood, and levels of unemployment that continue in certain areas, there is a relationship. So while personally I applaud the work, I also don't want to forget the context, because that's where even more work needs to occur. But thank you for allowing me to say that. Any other comments before we move on to item 8B? 8B, Order 21-03-16-04, in the matter of discussing a request by the Oregon Coast Humane Society to extend the lease term and leased area for property they are leasing on the Florence Transfer Station property. And we have Jeff Turk to lead us in this discussion.
Good morning, Chair Bernie, Commissioners. The Oregon Coast Humane Society, and formerly the Florence Area Humane Society, came to the county asking for an extension of the current lease they have for, the transfer station property in Florence, along with an increase in the area. Before proceeding with any further negotiations with the Humane Society, staff would want direction from the board how they would want to proceed, because there's going to be some time and effort involved in coming to an agreement, particularly because the Oregon Coast Humane Society is going to need to survey the area that, if the board chooses to extend the leased area. So there's going to be cost involved. So the staff wants some direction on how the board may want to proceed, whether they want to extend the lease, for how long, do they want to increase the area that's being leased. What the Humane Society is going to do, they're going to, my understanding is, wants to build a spay, neuter, and wellness clinic. Additional areas will also give them room to have trails and walking areas. I believe they had sent the board a letter that kind of outlines some of the other improvements that they're going to do. And again, so in talking with Jeff Orlandini, who's actually available to answer any questions the board may have about use of the transfer station property, and Dan Hurley, that currently the proposed area that they want won't interfere with transfer station activities, for what's currently going on and what they have planned. Again, we're talking, adding another 50 years to the current lease, if that's what the board chooses, which would be, 2194. So, the staff is looking for direction from the board on how it wishes to proceed, before we discuss further with the Oregon Coast Humane Society.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Comments, questions? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Mr. Schwartz, I'm looking at the analysis and the staff recommendation. It looks like the lease is kind of obsolete in nature, in at least the name change, but also in the length of the lease. There's no staff recommendation regarding the options, but it seems that council is recommending that we review the lease. And if we do continue to lease, have a different lease in place. Is that a good assessment?
Yeah, just to do a new lease, given that the Florence Humane Society changed their name to the Oregon Coast Humane Society, and some of the other changes that would happen. county council, and I discussed it with him, would be recommending just doing a new lease to include, the changes, the extended time, and, mostly, a lot of the same terms and provisions in the current lease would be, carried over. But yeah, given some of the changes, and what's also interestingly that, we didn't put an easement in the original lease, which, because technically that, road to the transfer station isn't a public road.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So really under item G, alternatives options, option 2 is to direct staff to negotiate with OCHS to extend lease term and leased area under conditions determined by the board. I would add and staff, because we may not identify all the conditions here, but at least the name change, the easement addition, and the length of the lease, I think, need to be reviewed. So when it's time for a motion, Mr. Chair, I think I would, if it's me making the motion, offer alternative 2. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is that a motion, or is that just identifying you're prepared to when discussion is over?
If I receive a second, then that will indicate that the board can discuss the motion as opposed to the item. So I will make a motion to item G1 to direct staff to negotiate with OCHS to extend lease terms in leased area under conditions determined by the board to include name change, potential easement, a potential length of lease, and other conditions identified by staff.
I'm sorry, you seconded? Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. Commissioner Trieger is seconded. Discussion to the motion. Someone has their microphone on, so it's hard to hear, but Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. Just a question, if we know, and this is directed to Mr. Turk or maybe Commissioner Bozovich, if any of his constituents have contacted him. Is there any opposition to the Humane Society expanding in this way from the community?
Not that I'm aware of. Commissioner Bozovich probably answer better.
If I may, Commissioner Bozovich, could you respond to that?
Thank you. I'm happy to finally get in on the conversation about something in my district.
Hey, I didn't see your hand.
Tried to get up a couple times, but
oh, I'm sorry.
I agree. We should move forward with directing staff to look at the lease. At the very least, there's a name change issue, and also it looks like the land area they want to lease should be changed. I'm a little bit reluctant, though, on the extension of the lease out to 99 years. And I haven't heard any local opposition to the Humane Society, but I will note that the Oregon Coast Humane Society has gone through a lot of turmoil over the last 5 years or so, with board members resigning, executive directors resigning. It has not been the most stable nonprofit in the county as far as leadership goes and direction. So that's why I'm a little bit reluctant to think about 99 years with an organization that struggled with their mission and leadership and board of directors over the last several years. I fully support, though, their mission down there. And I fully think, I really believe that it's important to us as a county to have them located in the Florence area, because our shelter is so far removed from Florence. Florence is a tourism area, so you get pets that come with tourists and get separated, and having to come all the way back, having to send animal control all the way to Florence, everything that goes along with that. It's just a great thing having them there. I want them to be successful, but I do think it might be smart for us to agree to expand the land area, agree to change the name, maybe think a little bit more about the extension of the lease terms, partly also because our waste management people can't tell us 99 years out that they don't need more room on the transfer station. It was right in the report. And as we think about all the things that we're trying to identify in the way of waste recovery to divert organic material from our landfill, that may happen at transfer stations and may need more room. Recycling of, styrofoam or other plastics that we're not doing now may require more room at a transfer station. I don't want to hem us in too much when it comes to that. So, I support the motion, but I also want staff to very seriously think about the time extension. I know that the Humane Society is wanting that time to justify adding the buildings. And that's really probably why they're looking for that 99-year term, so that they can justify some of the investments they want to make. We need to have a conversation back and forth. Is 99 years really necessary for that? My guess is ultimately in 20 or 30 years, we'll look at that site and say, yes, we can continue to have you there for longer. But I don't think we're at a point we can make that decision today to go to 99.
So I have 3 points. One is I hope to God I'm here in 20 to 30 years to look at it. Point 2, I do want to apologize to Commissioner Bozovich. I really, truly did not see your hand. I'm sorry. And finally, it's been communicated to me that this is listed in our agenda incorrectly as an order, that in fact, the intent of this was for discussion only, which I think given our discussion, most of us would probably agree that is more appropriate at this moment. And so I don't know if you want further discussion, but at the end of that, I will request that the motion be taken back and that we simply have a discussion on this item. Commissioner Farr.
Chair Bernier, with the approval of the second, I withdraw the motion.
Good clap. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, and thank you to those on high that have let us know that this is not in order to take action on. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Turk, it sounds like you do have a sense of what the commissioners feel, and we hope you'll kind of plod forward and bring some more specificity and recommended modifications as you move forward toward a decision as it relates to this site. Do you need anything else from us, sir?
No, my understanding again is that the board seems to be okay with expanding the area and just discuss with the Humane Society and county staff concerning the length, extension of the lease time. Just as an aside, just some, Commissioner Bozovich concerns, there is provisions in the lease which would be, carried over that if the Humane Society ceases to exist or changes from a nonprofit or doesn't provide the services for, no longer is providing services, that's grounds for termination of the lease. But yeah, I will discuss with the Humane Society and then come back to the board.
Thank you very much. Are there any other board comments from Mr. Turk before we move on? I'm looking at you, Commissioner Bozovich, twice. I don't want to miss you if you're raising your hand. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Turk.
Thank you.
Now, item 9, commissioner business. Are there any commissioner announcements? Commissioner Trieger, did I see your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just have a question for our administrator. This is something that the board adopted shortly before I took office, was the adoption of our housing action plan. And I was just looking through our committee or board assignments sheet to see if I could find anything that indicates what our next steps are, or a timeline for when we might expect to hear back from staff on progress toward implementation of that plan. Thank you.
I'm happy to just briefly, Chair and Commissioner Trieger, I believe we completed that assignment, but I do see that April 7th, we have a date that we're going to come back and provide an update for the board. I also believe that as we look to update our strategic plan, that the work for, ultimately, we want to move that work from an assignment, which is kind of a task, to more of a priority and a broader focus with some significant goals to it, so that, if the board so desires, that would end up on your strategic plan in the next update. But April 7th is the date that you're gonna, we have an update scheduled for you. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Quarterly updates. So we have quarterly updates that that have been set for that. April 7th is the next.
Commissioner Krieger, did you have anything else? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Farr, you had your hand up. You're muted, Commissioner.
I just muted myself. Thank you. Very quickly, Chair Bernie, while you were gone, I called on Commissioner Bozievich when he didn't raise his hand. So we balanced out on that.
So we're even. Then what's he complaining about?
It all works out in the end, right? And if it's not worked out yet, it's not the end yet. So the question that I have for you, Mr. Morgan, I don't have the full question on this, but I'm going to be posing this to you regarding rebuilding structures in the Holiday Farm fire area. My understanding has been that people could rebuild their homes on existing footprints, on the existing foundations that were modified and shorn up. I'm going to have a question regarding particularly one property up there where that may not be the case, where they may be having difficulty obtaining permits to build on the exact same footprint they were on prior to the fire. I'll give you more details of that in a direct message, and I'll include the other commissioners on that message. My question's not fully formed on that one yet, but once again, my understanding was that people would be able to rebuild on the same footprint. Thank you.
Chair, if it's all right, I just would provide it. I think I mentioned this last week because the board had asked, if I'm getting my dates right, I think it was last week the board had asked for a work session. And so I do want to remind the board, when I have had a number of conversations with staff, Mr. Hurley and Mr. Keir Miller in LMD over the last week, just to begin preparing for that work session that we'll have with the board on both the permit process and permit fees related to the Holiday Farm fire. So, there will be an opportunity to talk more and dive more into those issues related to the permit process for rebuilding.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr, and thank you, Mr. Mokrahisi. Commissioner Farr, do you have anything else? I'm trying my best to ignore Commissioner Bozivich's hand right now, so Commissioner Bozevich.
Thank you. I do, Steve, before we leave the fire permit issue, I know that there's concern after last night's meeting. I'm hearing that there's confusion about the 1-year deadline and what has to be done by the 1 year to vest your rights to reconstruct. I'm hearing feedback from people that went to the meeting last night that are now more confused about that than they were before the meeting. So if we can, that may be something we want to get clarified and messaged out to the community a little bit better. I want to just make 2 quick announcements or bring something to the board's attention, I should say, from my district that may get up to the board level that they may not be aware of, that I want to make sure the board's aware of. The first is an annexation process that's been ongoing in Florence with the Idlewood subdivision, what was going to be phase 4. The issue with that may come to the board level is that there was an ongoing drainage issue with the prior Idlewood phases 1, 2, and 3, that has never been resolved. And it's been ongoing since the 90s almost. And there's, files inches thick in Public Works about that drainage issue. And there's a lot, with the supposed addition that the developer now wants to move forward with by getting annexed into the city and getting away from county jurisdiction, there's a lot of pressure about that drainage issue. So you may start seeing a lot of email traffic and questions from constituents in the Florence area about why the county never resolved that drainage issue with the developer, and why it hasn't been cured. The second issue you'll probably hear from my district is with the Mapleton Water District. Apparently, they weren't reading their meters over the last 10 months and have been issuing estimated billing based on a prior month's bill or something. Well, they went out and read all the meters in the last month and issued bills that were between $200 and $500 to a lot of the residents out there. It's not exactly one of our most robust communities for economics. A lot of these people are not very high up and on fixed incomes. That just happened last week. Water districts are under state authority. They're not under county authority, but we'll probably start hearing about, help. What can we do to help those folks with the high water bills? On top of, this is the same water district that lost their filtration system and had a boil water notice for several months, and also had the water main break that occurred during the Sweet Creek fire when the firefighters were drawing from the water system. So it hasn't been the best system, but those two things may come up to where people are emailing the entire board about those issues. And I wanted to make the board aware of both of those local issues from my district.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? Commissioner Buck.
I just want to make a comment, since there was a couple of comments on the Holiday Farm fire area. I would just please ask that if commissioners are getting feedback, especially regarding challenges with permits or from our meetings, that you please include me, because we've had a lot of discussions. I'm generally present and very much involved with the planning department in order to alleviate many of those concerns. Specifically when it comes to the 12-year timeline, that did come up last night at the meeting. Planning department is working with county council to try to clarify what does or does not need to happen within the 12-month timeline. It is an area that is based on case law, and it's confusing. It's generally confusing, not necessarily the fault of the county or of any residents, clearly, but because it's a state law and the case law surrounding it is not easy to understand, but we do need to rely on county council to help us clarify that for the community. And in addition to that, we do have some bills in at the state legislative session that could extend that timeline, but of course, we won't know if that goes through until the bills are actually voted on and the governor signs those bills. So they're kind of in this purgatory situation right now. Do I build? Do I not build? How much do I build? It is not easy for them, and it is a burden on top of a burden, unfortunately. And I'm working diligently with Alex Kyler on those bills, as well as trying to figure out a clear way in order to convey information like this to our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Buck. I know how this has defined so much of your work life this last half year. Are there any other commissioners that would like to comment, or excuse me, to have any announcements? I would like to announce, Sharon, in my district, as Commissioner Bozovich did in his, and Commissioner Buck in hers, that the Springfield Economic Development Agency, on the roughly 9 acres that it owns, that is designated both urban district, urban renewal district, and opportunity zone. I have attempted to hammer on the desirability of that for development. And at this point in time, we finally had a public meeting, so I'm able to share with you that there are 3 proposals, all from credible groups, for development of that property. 2 of the 3 include a significant number, like several hundred housing units. Maybe 2 of the 3, but 1 of the 3 I'm aware of is looking at several hundred low-income or working family housing units. I don't believe that this is going to come to this body, but I do want to share with you how excited there were 78 members of the community listening into that session last evening. I think this is going to build and build. And I just wanted to share with this body the enthusiasm that is building and the public interest that may be served moving forward in this area. That's my only announcement. At this time, are there any future board assignment requests? Commissioner Farr, I know you've been waiting for this one.
Thank you, Chair Byrne. And I've delayed it a couple of weeks based on constraints, agenda constraints, but I am your representative to the Public Health Advisory Committee. And the Public Health Advisory Committee had a series of meetings of one of their subcommittees regarding the declaration of racism as a health crisis in Lane County. As a public health crisis in Lane County. I have in my hand a resolution that was drafted by that subcommittee and approved by the Public Health Advisory Board. And they asked me at the last meeting a week ago yesterday to bring this to the Board of County Commissioners. At this point, I'd like to ask the agenda team to consider a future agenda item, a work session on the resolution declaring that the Lane County Board of Health declares racism as a public health crisis. I have this resolution. It has been passed to the board before. It's in draft form right now. I have a second resolution that was drafted by several community groups and sent out to the board also. So we have these 2 resolutions. They're very similar. This one's a little bit more detailed than this one. But if I do receive the appropriate number of consent or agreement on this, then I will provide these resolutions once again to the board and to staff and ask that staff, that the agenda team consider a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. I would ask for support on that.
I'm going to request that in these remote meetings, head nods be converted to hands up or thumbs up so that I can see. So is there any discussion to this item, or Commissioner Trieger?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I will be fully supportive of this coming to us for a work session. I would take advice from our staff as to whether that's more appropriate when we are gavelled in as the Board of Health, so that we hear this public health issue as the Board of Health. And on a personal note, this is a topic that I have been learning a lot about, participating in various conferences, and would encourage my colleagues. If you go to the American Health Association website, there's a map showing you can filter by jurisdictional level and see where these kinds of declarations and resolutions have been implemented across the country. There is a national movement to get the CDC to recognize racism as a public health crisis. And there is available on the Oregon Public Health Association's website a phenomenal video of a conference presentation I attended at their annual event last fall from Dr. Camara Jones on this very topic. So it's a very rich and important and long overdue item, and I'm very appreciative to Vice Chair Farr and the Public Health Committee Advisory Board for bringing this forward, and I'm fully in support. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to make a comment before I ask for convoluted head nods? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich, excuse me.
Thank you. And I've stated before my feelings in opposition to racism on this board, but I just want to say that my only concern about this is what is the definition of racism as it seems to be in flux in our society today. It's now considered racist to ask a student to show their work on a math question. It's now considered racist to honor individual achievement. You know, if you read some of what is behind critical race theory and some of the definitions of white supremacy, I'm concerned with how the definitions morphed and is becoming more about collectivism against individualism than it is about racism. And that's my only concern, is if there is a clear definition of what racism is as a public health crisis versus leaving that open and to interpretation that seems to be morphing daily in this country.
Commissioner Bozievich, I'm gonna tell you my takeaway from your comment, and you tell me if I'm wrong or right. My takeaway is you support a work session, but this is a concern you will bring up in the work session. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, and I support the work session if that can be part of the discussion. If defining racism is not part of the discussion, then I don't support the work session.
I will, if I may, just for a moment, Commissioner, but during the work session, I'm going to give you my definition of racism. Okay, Commissioner Buck.
My screen stopped for a little while there, so I didn't catch what everybody said, but excuse me, I caught the last part of Commissioner Traeger's comments. It seems like we're all giving the comments in response to Commissioner Farr's proposal. I just want to say that I'm fully behind that proposal. I think it's an important conversation that we need to have and have needed to have for quite some time. So just know that I've got support for that work session.
I'm going to call the question, or it's really not a question, but all those that would like to have a work session on declaring racism a public health crisis and then diving into specifically what that means, please signify by raising your hand. Looks to me like we're having a work session, Commissioner. Are there any other future board assignment requests? I was going to say, Commissioner Bozievich, I can't tell if you're raising your hand or not. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm trying to decide if it's a board assignment request or if I should bring this up under other business, and I think I'll have an other business item.
Very good, sir. Thank you. I actually have one that I'm going to run by the board now. My assignment, the context for my request is that we know that in addition to everything else, Mr. Mokraheisky is leading probably a very exhaustive planning for dollars this county anticipates coming from the American Rescue Plan. There happens to be someone that this board has heard from, but each time it's really been off his sort of, what I know to be his professional expertise. There used to be a thing called the Oregon Progress Board. And the Oregon Progress Board used to develop metrics for each county that was not attached to programs or systems, but it just looked at things like hunger in this county, poverty in this county, without defining what the systems were or what they should be. And a local resident, Dennis Sandow, was the author of the last Oregon Progress Report Board, and they did have a section on Lane County. So my future board assignment request, it's really an agenda request, is simply to have a very brief presentation with an opportunity to ask questions as it relates to the data of the Oregon Progress Board and how that does or does not inform our thinking as we're moving forward. It would be 20 minutes, 10 presentation, 10 us asking questions. You comment on that, and then we'll see if anyone else is interested. No comments. Can I see a show of hands of those that would be interested in a future board assignment regarding that request?
I've got a question. Can you clarify the request one more time for me?
A presentation from Mr. Sandow, author of the Oregon Progress Board's last metrics on quality of life in Lane County, as we are looking at trying to improve it through dollars that will be coming into the county. So it'll be an information thing. Okay. Are there any other future board assignment requests? I believe at this time it is a review of assignments, Mr. Mokrahysky, is that correct?
So I have two Commissioner Farr's requests for a work session on a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis, and Commissioner Burney's request for a presentation regarding the Oregon Progress Board. Is that what it's called?
Before your time, Steve.
I'm not familiar with it. Oregon Progress Board about quality of life metrics.
I wasn't here for the entire meeting, so I don't know if that's complete or not. And as soon as, okay, Vice Chair Farr has indicated it is, and Commissioner Trieger has her hand up.
I have a clarifying question. Thank you. Mr. Mokrahysky, is it, when I asked about the racism as a public health crisis issue, I talked about us bringing that up as the Board of Health. Is that necessary for the work session, or will that only come into play when and if we were to take any action?
That's a good question. I don't know that it's necessary, but we'll talk to County Council and Health and Human Services about if you sit as the joint. Sometimes they'll sit as the joint Board of Health and Board of Commissioners when you have the work session, or maybe we'll have you sit as the Board of Health if the intention is to have you consider a resolution. So when you take an action, you would sit as the Board of Health. So we'll talk to the appropriate staff about that, and then I think the agenda team can make the decision about which one is appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Chair, I also wanted to note, I think I said April 7th for the works or the update on the affordable housing plan. It's actually April 6th.
Thank you. At this point, before I request Diana reads us into executive session, let's say that once she does read us into executive session, we will convene in executive session at 11:15 so that we can have a few minute break. I would also like to say after that, we will not reconvene again until 5:30 this evening. And it looks like that's all I had. So before Diana reads us in, Commissioner Bozovich.
I was going to ask if you could cover other business. So I want to get back to something we discussed.
You know what? I am so sorry. I am so glad you're there to keep me on track. That is correct. Other business, sir. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So last week we had a discussion and we kind of tabled moving ahead with the idea of developing an ordinance that would get us back the cost of collecting taxes for other local governments. And I agreed to let that go till we found out whether we had the authority or not. Our county council has said we do have the authority, similar to the fact that the city of Eugene charges Lane County to collect our transient room taxes. That's typical of what happens with governments. If you create a cost to collect a revenue stream, you usually are allowed to recoup that cost. And that's all I really want to do is develop an ordinance that codifies that so that we can, from the point we pass it moving forward, recoup costs of anything other than ad valorem property taxes, which we are specifically prevented from by Oregon statute, collecting the cost of collecting those tax revenues. This would just be, so that in the future, if the city of Cottage Grove chooses to do some kind of payroll tax that we have to collect for our staff that works out of the Cottage Grove vehicle shop, we'll be able to collect the cost of developing that software and collecting the cost annually. If there's some other tax, and as I'm sure, as we consider the idea, and it's been proposed of us increasing our transient room tax for affordable housing, that the city of Eugene is going to increase how much they charge us to collect that tax. It's just kind of the way things work between governments. So I I would move that we direct staff to start preparing an ordinance that would be cost recovery for local revenues other than ad valorem tax that we have to incur to collect.
I'm going to ask you to restate that motion if in fact there is a second. Is there a second? Now, Commissioner Farr is not with us. Is there a second to that motion?
I second the motion.
I thought he wasn't with us. Okay. Commissioner Bozovich, could you restate the motion and then we can entertain discussion on it?
Sure. It's to direct staff to prepare an ordinance, which of course an ordinance is going to have to go through a first and a second reading and a public hearing. So it's not something that's going to just happen. It'll have a public process, but to direct staff to prepare an ordinance to get reimbursed for the cost of collecting revenue measures and taxes for local governments within Lane County, other than ad valorem real property tax.
Thank you. Discussion to the motion.
I guess I'll just say that this just is kind of a leveling of the playing field, and make sure that, you know, we're compensating the city for collecting our transient room tax. They should compensate us for collecting the payroll tax or any other jurisdiction that passes a revenue measure that requires the county to have cost in collecting and dispersing that income measure. So that it's just a fairness sort of thing, and it's a codifying that so that we're able to have staff, you know, account for that cost and bill and get reimbursed.
Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I have two brief questions. One is, has there ever been another time, and if so, when, that this has come up, that this kind of dynamic has been in play? And the other part of my question is, if I'm understanding, were we to draft this ordinance, it would require us to do what the motion is suggesting. Whereas if we don't have such an ordinance, we always have the option open to bring it up on a case-by-case basis and ask for such compensation. Is that correct?
Commissioner Bozovich?
Yes, that it would require us, and I believe that's part of the fairness in this, that we wouldn't be singling out an organization because, you know, that if a city or some other taxing district passes a tax that costs us money to collect and redistribute back to them, it's even for everybody, and they know it up front and will be aware of that. And that's, I think, a fairness thing. If we do case by case decision making, that's going to get challenged, I believe, as being not necessarily equal justice under the law, if you know what I mean, and equal application of the law.
Commissioner Trieger, did you have anything else?
I just wondered if this has ever, I just asked if this is the first time this has ever occurred or come up, the dynamic that's currently in place that's brought Commissioner Bozovich to bring this to us, where there's been a city that's, et cetera, et cetera.
This is the first time I believe a city has passed an income measure that's cost the county funds to collect that I know of. But I've only been a county commissioner for 10 years, so something could have happened long before that.
Commissioner Bozovich, with the current group of county commissioners, you're not allowed to say you've only been a county commissioner 10 years. Any other comments or questions?
All right, one more clarifying question, if I may. I can't remember, I believe County Council addressed this last time this came up. This would or would not retroactively, were this to happen, we were to pass such an ordinance, it would or would not retroactively impact City of Eugene in this particular instance with their payroll, their public safety payroll tax.
Commissioner Bozovich?
Yeah, I believe that it's going, whatever we pass is forward looking. So we wouldn't be able to go back and get the $30-some thousand we spent developing the software to collect their taxes, but we would be able to collect the $6,500 or so a year that it takes to continue to collect that tax.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And the reason I seconded this is because of something that Commissioner Bozovich said, and that is that the city of Eugene does indeed pass along the small cost of collecting transient room tax to us. There's a precedent established there. And I think that anytime we are having to spend money that we would otherwise put into direct service surrounding the services that the county provides, that we should be able to recover that. I think it's a matter of principle as much as anything, and it's not a large amount of money, but I think it's a statement that needs to be made in order for us to be true to our word that we will provide the maximum level of services that we can with the revenue that we receive.
Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. One follow-up then. Has there been, and this is maybe directed to Administrator Mokrehevsky, has there been any effort or conversation to have any kind of memorandum or request this of the city without going down the road of an ordinance right now, since that an ordinance wouldn't affect the current situation with the city of Eugene that's brought this to our attention?
Yeah, Chair, Commissioner Trieger, I'm not aware of any conversations I certainly have not had any conversations with the city. If the board asked us to do that, we certainly could, but I'm not aware of any to date.
Commissioner Buck.
I appreciate that question because it seems like this is fairly heavy-handed for this particular situation, given the fact that we haven't even reached out to our partner to have a conversation about this yet. Not that I don't agree with the principle. We have finite resources and we didn't necessarily have any choice in the decision. So I agree with the principle. My concern is if we haven't even reached out to our partner yet to discuss this, it seems like that would be a reasonable first step before we launch down this road. I am a little weary of what unintended consequences could occur from an ordinance like this, because I don't know what it will bring if something else happens in a situation. And of course, I don't know what that situation is. I'm hesitant because I'm unsure of what unintended consequences may be.
I'm going to presume that's a hand, Commissioner Bozovich.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was. Thank you, Chair Bernie and Commissioner Buck. I believe that you probably do have a point that maybe we should approach the city first to see if they would willingly set up an IGA where we're reimbursed for our costs. So I'm willing to entertain a motion to table this until that effort can be made and we can bring it back up at a later meeting after staff can report back to us about that effort. But I will say part of the whole process of developing an ordinance will be staff looking into it, legal going through it, writing it up, reading it, then having 2 weeks for the public to examine it and coming to a public hearing and bringing up any thoughts about unintended consequences. So, there'll be time to do all that, but I'm more than willing to wait another couple weeks or whatever staff needs to approach the city and get an answer on your question. So, I don't know. There's a motion and a second on the floor. I can with the second's agreement, I'll withdraw the motion and we can bring it up after staff reports back. If we can just maybe do that as head nods direction to staff to talk to the city.
Well, first, I think that would be the exact right thing to do, Commissioner, if that's how you feel. And second, is there any other discussion before we do head nods to deal with this item?
Chair Bernie, I do accept the maker of the motion's proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Trieger, you have your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. So just for point of process, do we need to consider, if we do, I'm happy to consider this stepping back in our agenda, a assignment request that staff explain the situation and the challenges that we're facing with the City of Eugene and see if there's a workable solution. If it doesn't require such a formal step, I'm fine with that. But if it does, I'm happy to make that. Thank you.
If I may defer to either Mr. Mokrahajski or Mr. Dingle, my understanding is the motion that was made and seconded, which would require a vote, has been withdrawn, and therefore no vote is necessary at this time. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dingle. This, by the way, for the record, because I was guilty of this one time, I never want to occur again. There is no verbal of Mr. Dingle saying that is correct, but he shook his head and he.
That is, your statement is correct. No vote is required.
With the maker and seconds agreement, then it sounds like we do have an additional request for staff follow-up. Is that correct?
Yes, please.
Do we need a hands on that? Oh, there you go. Okay. So, Mr. Mokrahajski, I think you have a third assignment. Okay. Now, it is 11:20. If Diana would be kind enough to read us into executive session, we will reconvene in executive session at 11:30. Diana?
I will do that. At this time, the Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, and to discuss public records or information, the disclosure of which is prohibited or restricted or otherwise made confidential or privileged under Oregon law. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602H, ORS 192.3559A, and ORS 40.225 lawyer-client privilege, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session, and the board reserves the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.
Okay, we are now recessed until executive session at 11:30. Thank you.